and welcome to Bicycle Touring Talk 78. My name is George Schlackheg, and I'm here to share the stories from my bicycle tour coast to coast across Canada. If you're new here, I usually post these on Saturdays, and we're going across Canada from west to east, which was exactly what I did in 2017 for Canada's 150th anniversary. Last episode, we made it as far as Yorkton, Saskatchewan. The weather across Saskatchewan had been particularly rough. There was a constant, strong wind, thankfully mostly from the west, but rain and cold temperatures made it really tough at times. I was asked in the comments about what I usually wear while I'm on tour, and I tried to answer it in a reply as good as I could. See, my wardrobe for this Canada tour was to some extent dictated by a pretty tight budget. It was mostly the same stuff I'd wear riding my bike in the city during summer, plus a hoodie, a good windbreaker, and some nylon pants that were also water repellent. As for shoes, I wore sandals pretty much the entire way, even when it was cold and wet. That certainly wouldn't be everyone's first choice, but it worked well for me. I admit that there were uncomfortable moments and days, but overall it wasn't bad. I'll do a video in the future about what I would actually recommend regarding clothing for touring. Of course, keeping an eye on the budget as well. You can easily spend your entire touring budget on gear. When this happens, you probably won't go anywhere far. The clothing you already have will be good enough most of the time. Now, if you can afford better, go for it. But if you can't, you can still do that big tour, even with the stuff you already have. Let's get back to that Sunday morning in Yorkton. It was June 25th to be precise, when I woke up early because I was stealth camping in the city park, not knowing if this was legal or not. The tent was wet from moisture, but it had stayed completely dry on the inside. I had no choice but to pack it away like that. After leaving the park, I rode into the downtown area. My first stop was at 7-Eleven for a hot dog, then the McDonald's next door for coffee and internet access. Besides keeping up with my emails, I was actually writing a daily blog on my website. It's called seecreative.com, and there's a link in the description if you want to check it. Then I had 2 panniers full of dirty laundry that had to be washed. Google Maps revealed 2 options within short reach. One was located near a superstore, so that was going to be my last stop in Yorkton for some groceries. When I finally left town, stocked up on food and with clean clothes, the weather was nice. So I'm leaving Yorkton right now. I'm back on the Yellowhead. There's a sign there that says Winnipeg 453 kilometers. I'm thinking that's 4 days. So the only thing I gotta worry about still is my tent. I had to pack it in this morning early because I was stealth camping and it was wet still. But there's 2 ways I can deal with that. One is to stop somewhere along the way and unpack it, lay it over a picnic table and let it dry. Or I just stop early today and get a paid camping and set it up, and before I crawl in there, let it dry out a bit. So we'll see what happens. I'm thinking I'm gonna get to Manitoba today. It was still a little on the cool side, but the wind was light compared to previous days, and it was again mostly from the west. A clear sky and more sunshine made it feel so much better. After about 35 kilometers, I reached the village of Saltcoats. There was a park with Muskoka-style chairs and view of a small lake. The perfect place to have lunch. So I found a different kind of rest area here. It's really luxurious actually. I can see a little lake. There were geese here before, they all ran away. But yeah, it's nice to sit down like this and have lunch. And I'm actually considering to pack out my tent here and put it over these chairs. If you look just over there. See? It was by far the most comfortable lunch in days, as the weather was now really nice. There was still enough wind to dry my tent perfectly within minutes, but it was no longer giving me the chills. Finally, a sign of summer. I took a spin through the village before continuing the ride down the Yellowhead Highway. It continued easy, but at times the shoulder was rough and traffic was slightly busier than it had been the day before. Some drivers were passing dangerously close, coming from the opposite direction. That always makes me freak out. That was a kind of passing maneuver I don't appreciate, because even though I'm on the shoulder, I'm still oncoming traffic. People also seem to throw a lot of garbage directly out of their car windows. Do you know those little stickers they have on McDonald's coffee cups? You collect 7 and it's a free coffee. I collect them because when I get the card full, that's a free coffee. Well, you'd be surprised at how many end up in the ditch. I collected 4 that day. Probably all coming from the same restaurant. Throwing trash out of your car windows is not only illegal, it's also disgusting, and it really makes me wonder how we're going to tackle things like climate change, like big things, if we can't even do the most basic things to deal with our own garbage. Well, I had a few free coffees, but I would have gladly paid for them myself. Please don't be a polluter. The next stop was in Langenburg, a little town with German roots. There was a Kaiser William Avenue and an old Volkswagen converted into a planter. This was at the rest area where I stopped to have a snack. When I had to go pee, I found the little outhouse was locked up. For a guy like me, that's not a huge problem. But the lack of public bathrooms when cycling across Canada needs to be mentioned somewhere, and it might as well be here. I guess most people drive right through Langenburg. They're missing out on a really interesting feature. Well, it's not in use anymore, but there's an antique swing at the rest area. There's a huge red structure, and that's a big swing. They call it Goliath.
It's the biggest one they made. And the pivots at the top, they're actually differentials from old Chevys.
According to the plaque, it was the third and biggest one of its kind. I found it most remarkable that it was built entirely from used agricultural equipment. The pivots way up top were old differentials. It would have been so cool to try out. At least I got to sit on it and pretend. Langenburg was my last stop in Saskatchewan.
This is probably the last major stop that I have in Manitoba. Not Manitoba, I'm in Saskatchewan still. But I'm only 15 kilometers away from the Manitoba border. So yeah, after this apple and a piece of chocolate and some water, 15 kilometers, that's yeah. That's a long train.
I reached the Manitoba border less than an hour later.
See, I'm about to enter province number 4 of my trip. And this, yeah, this also puts me into the central time zone. And the total distance is 3,386 kilometers.
The first surprise was a long and steep descent. Followed by an equally long and slow climb.
Now I'm gonna pay the price. Look at that.
The ride to the town of Russel took a bit longer than I had expected, but I eventually arrived and found the visitor center. It was closed already, but there was a map of town posted in the window with an area marked as free camping. This was a really welcome surprise. After a day on the road, I was tired, and the last thing I wanted to do was scouting around town to see where I could get away with stealth camping. I rode my bike to what I thought was that area. There was a wooded sort of park. At the nearby school, I also found a picnic table and made some sandwiches for supper.
Yeah, it's supper time. I'm in Russel, Manitoba, and at the visitor center, which was closed because it's Sunday evening, obviously. But there was a sign there and a little map, and it said that this Peace Park or something like that, it's free camping. And yeah, I rode my bicycle here, and it looks like it's right where this baseball field and all this stuff is, but there's a area here with trees in it, and I think that's where I'm gonna pitch my tent because it's more protected from the elements. So yeah, I'm happy. The weather is getting better, it looks like. Beautiful evening. It's not too hot. I mean, it's never too hot, but it's not too cold. Not freezing. I'm sitting here in a t-shirt and it's comfortable.
It was almost dark when I set up my tent. Manitoba is in a different time zone during the summer. The reason being daylight savings time, which isn't a thing in Saskatchewan. Both provinces are in central time. It was a reminder that time was going to change for me gradually as I was moving further east. The time difference between Manitoba and BC, where I had started weeks earlier and where Barbara was still traveling, was 3 hours. That's significant when you're trying to communicate directly via phone or text message. It also made me feel like I had ridden halfway around the world already. Well, Russel is a really quiet and laid-back little town. This is probably why I got away with camping where I did. As it later turned out, I had not found the free camping area at all. That was on the outskirts of town in a more open area. Sometimes when you're tired, you end up making mistakes like that. In hindsight, this wasn't a big deal. The night was quiet and I slept really well. The only thing missing was a bathroom. Did someone notice me or complain? Find out in the next episode. I hope you're enjoying those stories and give this one a thumbs up. It's always good to see more of you subscribe over time too, so please consider it if you haven't done so yet. See you again soon.